Hey, good morning, everybody. Brian LePask with OPSC. Welcome to the Seismic Mitigation and Facility Hardship Program Stakeholder Meeting. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll have two presenters. I'm going to be presenting the initial part of it, and then Jennifer Mastretti, our Plan Verification Team Supervisor, will be going into some of the changes to our cost estimate form that goes along with the program. That's the SAB Form 58-01. So, as many of you know, back in 2020, we did a big rehaul of the facility hardship and seismic mitigation program regulations. And at that time, and it's in the same spirit today, we're really not putting forth a lot of policy or procedural changes or suggestions. Rather, we're focused on making structural changes, language changes, with the goal of making the program and the regulations more user friendly and hopefully adding clarity to them where, just to make it a little bit more clear than it was before. And a lot of what we're suggesting is really based on feedback that we've received from all of you, and also by just having a lot of projects under our belt under these new rules. And so, or under the new structure, I should say. So again, that's the spirit of this meeting today is to get feedback from you. We're partnering to make the best regulations and rules and program that we can. And now that we've had them for a decent amount of time and seen lots of applications, we just found some opportunities for a few areas to make improvements and add more clarity. We also wanted to take, like I said, to take this opportunity to discuss with the folks that matter the most, which is all of you. You're out there using this program, applying for it, we're administering it. There's a different lens there. And so we want to work with you in order to make the best rules possible. We value all your perspectives, and we've had a really good track record when we've combined our powers to make these programs and these rules. So that's exactly what we're doing today. I'll talk about how it's going to work, but essentially, the more feedback we can get, the better. You'll have an opportunity today to ask questions or make suggestions. And there'll be that opportunity once the meeting's over too. So if you're not able to watch it live with us today, there'll be different ways that you can send us information that we can incorporate into the next item. So along with the facility hardship program and seismic mitigation program regulations, like I mentioned, we also have a form that goes along with the program. It's a mandatory form, and it's actually incorporated into regulations as well, and that's the 5801, which is essentially just a cost estimate. And so in consultation with Sierra West, which many of you probably know, our regulations require us to use the Sierra West guide. We've kind of revamped the way that the contractor's burden section is displayed. You may have been more familiar with that section being called soft costs, but it really is the proper term is contractor's burden. And we've also updated some of the way that some of those grants are calculated. And all we've really done is align it with the way that the Sierra West Guide prescribes it. And it's, like I said, it's our programs require us to be in conformance with that, so that we're really just aligning that form with what Sierra West has told us. A few housekeeping things. The way it's going to work today, we're going to go over the item all the way through in a couple different sections. We're gonna split it up basically in half, or roughly in half. And we'll when we get through all the regulation changes, we're going to pause and take questions. It'll kind of reset, I think, a little bit and give us a chance to ask any questions you have about whatever we've presented thus far while they're still fresh in your head. Then we're going to switch over after that and go into the changes to the 5801. And once we're done with that, we'll pause for questions there as well. And then I have a few things at the end I wanted to mention, and I'll probably open it up for one more round of questions at the end. And then once we get all your great feedback that we're going to be taking down today, and I know you're going to offer us a lot of it, I hope, we're going to carefully go back and look at our regulation text. And at the next meeting, we'll probably have more of a walkthrough or a line by line of the actual regulations. We have provided a copy of some regulation draft changes today. It's in your packet. But we don't really plan to go over those in detail today. It's more, today I really wanted to more focus on the concepts and what our goals are for these changes. And again, it's really just to add clarity and just kind of in recognition of some of the things that we've been seeing over the last couple of years in the programs. So the plan today is really go over those concepts, get as much feedback as we can, and then do more of a line-by-line crawl of the regulations next time. I think we have a pretty good version of the regulations already for what our goals are, but those perspectives may change. There might be some suggestions that you all have to make them just a little bit better. And like I said, we'll give you, there is a Q&A option in your menu. If you go into the Zoom menu at the bottom, if you don't see a Q&A button, if you click on, I believe it says more. Yeah, if you click on more, there is an opportunity there for a Q&A section, and you can ask questions through there. If they're really straightforward questions, we may answer them in the chat. And if not, then when we pause, we'll read them out one by one and address them that way. You'll also have the ability to submit any feedback you have through email or by giving one of us a call once the meeting's concluded. So like I was saying, if you're not able to see this live, if you're watching it on a recorded video, feel free to get in touch with us, and we're going to have the ability to accept those for the next couple weeks. So with that, I'm going to begin, and I'm going to share the item and just kind of walk through. So give me 1 second here. Okay, has everybody seen that okay? Somebody can just verbally let me know, that'd be great.
Yeah, the item shows up fine.
Perfect, okay, thank you. All right, so we talked about this already, kind of the description of what the program is and what our purpose of today is. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into our analysis section here. And I'm going to try to go through this as carefully as I can. And like I said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or just write them down to ask. I'll be pausing, maybe 20 minutes or so when I get through all this. It depends on how talkative I am today. But please, I can't stress enough, the purpose of this meeting is to get your feedback. So the more feedback we get, the better rules we're going to have. So here we go. All right, the first one we're talking about is in .61, and this is adjustments to the mod baseline. There's basically two adjustments that result to school facility program modernization eligibility at the project site. The first one is pretty straightforward. It's just the adjustment that we make when we do replacement projects. Whatever buildings we're replacing, we redate those, and you don't see an adjustment like that goes to the SAB, but we do that adjustment internally, and a lot of times it may or may not need like an official adjustment, but it's just the standard one we always do when that building is replaced. It no longer has the same age, and so we're redating them. The second one is a little bit more unique, and it's really kind of the driving force behind this change that we're making. If there's a building or buildings that qualify for replacement, let's say they're classroom buildings, but the district doesn't have the enrollment to support the need to replace them. There's already enough classrooms at that site to house all the kids that are there. We're not going to provide replacement funding in those cases, and we want to be able to remove those buildings from your site inventory if that's what's happening. And so along with that, there's a school board resolution that we collect, and it's essentially acknowledging, the district is acknowledging that the building has been or will be removed from K through 12 use. The way that this section was written before, a few people had told us that it seemed like that resolution was needed in both cases, but it's really not. It's just needed for that second scenario that I mentioned about where you're not going to have the building anymore and you're going to be removing it from the site inventory. And so the way that we wrote it was just to clarify that. That was our goal there, was to make it clear that that resolution is only needed for that second adjustment, not for the standard adjustment that takes place when a building's replaced. And then moving along, grade category. So we inserted a definition for grade category, and this isn't in our overall regulation definitions. It's 1859.2. It's not in that section. It's just for the sections having to do with facility hardship and seismic mitigation. And we're clarifying that the way that we determine the number of classrooms and the capacity of the site is done on a grade category basis. And what I mean by that is it's those configurations that you're used to seeing in our program, K through 6, 7 through 8, 9 through 12, non-severe SDC and severe SDC. And the reason that we're adding this is because we've had some confusion about how exactly do we determine capacity? Is it by those categories, or is it by each grade level? And we do it by category, by those different grade spans. So if you have an elementary school, K through 6, rather than looking at how many kindergarten classrooms you need, how many first grade classrooms you need, we look at it on whole, K through 6. And so that's what that change is. Going down, minimum work. So as many of you know, the programs, these two programs, facility hardship and seismic, they're primarily used to fund the minimum mitigation work for whatever health and safety issue you have, but you can also include work that's required to obtain plan approval. Typically, this is stuff like path of travel, access compliance, maybe some fire work, whatever DSA, it's usually DSA will impose in order to get their plan approval. We allow you to include that as part of the minimum work that we can fund. So it's not always DSA. It's mostly DSA, but not always. We wanted to make sure it was clear in our regulations and that we're being flexible, that if there's another agency that has some sort of oversight on the work that you're doing and they're requiring you to do things, that we're able to fund those things as well. So we're just clarifying that it may not always be DSA that's imposing requirements. There might be a local government agency, for example, that's requiring something. And so the changes that we made were with the goal of making sure that we're able to allow that work as well, not just from DSA. The next one down is documents that are required when you come in for submittal. We think this is already, again, this is something that's already pretty clear, but we wanted to make sure it was extra clear. We took the opportunity to clarify documentation needs for processing replacement applications specifically. And it's just, mostly it's going to enable us to have a more efficient process. We'll have all the things that we need in order to conduct our review. And we've noticed that there's two things in particular that we haven't always received. And so we inserted them as being required documents. The first one is a site diagram of the project site, and it's going to tell us all the facilities on that site, whatever their building type or use is, the grade level that they serve, and also the square footage. This is something that we look at when we're doing replacement projects. We're looking at what that site already has versus what it's needing, and through the lens of what we're replacing. And so that's what we use that for. Also, in replacement projects, you can request site development. If you're replacing buildings, putting new buildings in, you can request site development. We hadn't always seen the site development worksheet come in if districts weren't sure that they were qualifying for replacement funds. In those cases, we were redating applications when we did receive the site development worksheet, because we weren't able to do a review of all the requested grants upon submittal if they don't have that. The other thing is the Form 5004 that you use to apply for funds does talk about if you're requesting site development, you need to submit a site development worksheet. So this is, I guess you could say, the term is belts and suspenders, just to make sure it's clear that if you are requesting site development, that you send in that worksheet so that we can do our review. So those are the two things we added there. The next one is mitigation of asbestos. This is something that's come up quite a few times recently. And the current regulations do allow for mitigation of asbestos, specifically when lab results demonstrate that the asbestos is friable. We've received a few projects and a few inquiries about how this works, and so we wanted to clarify how we see it and how really kind of what the facility hardship program can or can't fund in relation to these kinds of projects. We took a look at the facility hardship program statutes. It clearly talks about the program being designed to address costs to mitigate extraordinary circumstances. That's what the education code says. And then also, if you look at how that kind of works along with SFP modernization, those program statutes actually say that the modernization funds can be used for various types of things. One of the things included in that list is abatement of hazardous asbestos. So we wanted to make sure our regulations for the facility hardship program drew a clear distinction between those two requirements, and also just to ensure that the way that many of you probably know this too, these health and safety projects are they're to address extraordinary circumstances, but also they're situations where extraordinary things have happened. We provided a couple of examples in our cover. The example provided in the cover talks about an earthquake that occurred. This is an actual project, and it resulted in encapsulated asbestos becoming friable. It shook it loose and it started to inhabit the interior space. We think that's a clear example of something that's extraordinary that would be eligible under the facility hardship program. If asbestos is made friable through routine modernization or repair work, something like routine modernization work, fire or access compliance upgrades, flooring replacements, things like that. This is more in the realm of what SFP modernization funding should be covering, as it does not represent an extraordinary circumstance. So the language that we've inserted into that section, that's the goal that we had, was to clarify those requirements and how that works within the confines of the program statutes. Let's see, moving on to the next topic, it's a clarification of our method for replacement applications. We've seen some really creative and frankly, really awesome projects in the last couple of years from mostly larger districts, but not always. They're really complicated and they may have several funding sources, and we welcome this. I think districts are being very wise about leveraging all of their potential sources of funding to do these really large construction or rehabilitation projects where a lot of times nearly the whole site's affected. But we've added language in a few spots to help make this process more prescriptive and a little bit more clear on how we approach them, because it gets really complicated really quickly. You're looking at, in some cases, several plan sets, and in many cases, it's several applications that are working on the same project. OPSC looks at them on an application by application basis, but for a school district, it's one big project that's probably taking place over several phases, maybe even several years. And so we were trying to strengthen those areas to make it very clear about how all that works. We clarify that funding will be based on both the facility type being constructed and also what was pre-existing. And really what that means is our kind of base or starting square footage eligibility for a replacement project is based on what was existing. But the amount of space that to be replaced is viewed through a little bit of a different lens if you're not building back the same type of space. And so, and I have an example, but this occurs a lot, and there are a little few restrictions to this, especially in regards to other area. But the example I had, if you're replacing admin space with library space, the funding amount is going to be started or beginning based off the amount of admin space that you're replacing. But the new space that you're building would potentially be capped by any of the limitations or guidelines that we have in our regulations regarding the replacement type of space. So hopefully the language that we've added has clarified that. That's kind of the primary thing we did. Also, one of the things that we looked at was, if you're replacing a facility that was previously below the minimum amount provided in our chart, and this is the chart in the regulations that shows all the different types of facilities, and then you basically plug your enrollment in to determine how much square footage you have eligibility for. I'm talking about that chart. There's a minimum in many cases for various types of facilities. And when we looked at that, if there was projects that are coming in that had an existing facility that was below the minimum, we'll actually provide funding for up to the minimum amount in a replacement building if it qualifies for one of the two programs, as long as you're constructing it. So if you had a 3,600 square foot NP room, I'm just pulling this out of air, that it was that's what was there before, but there's a health and safety issue. The building needs to be replaced. We're going to actually provide you funding for the minimum, which is probably about 5,000 square feet. So you're going to actually get an increased facility based on that minimum size. Again, as long as you're constructing that amount of square footage. And then lastly, in this area, we've seen applications where the facility includes toilet space, but the site already has more toilet space than is shown as being needed in the facilities chart. If that new toilet space is required in order to obtain DSA's approval of the plans, we may be able to fund beyond that cap, but the district is just going to have to demonstrate that it was a requirement to gain plan approval. So we're going to need that extra bit of assurance that or verification that the added space was a requirement. And then let's see. I just have a note here that we're trying to provide as much flexibility as we can in this area, and it's still something that we're working on all the time. But it's one of those things that we thought it was really important to address because of the complexity of the projects that we've been seeing. So that was what our goal was there. Okay. Moving on to further define eligible funding for rehabilitation projects. This is really about, well, first of all, let me start. This is one of the areas that I was really interested in getting everybody's feedback on. We struggled a lot with this and challenged on how to really address these. And I'll go over why, but the more feedback we can get on you or get from you on this, the better. But what our goal is here is to allow rehabilitation funding for lunch shelters or other unenclosed structures. And the program regulations already provide for that. But the challenge that we've had is how to approach them. The good part is that the industry specialist reports typically will be very clear about what rehabilitation is needed, if they need to be replaced, et cetera. And so we rely heavily on that. But as this is a minimum work program, we're just trying to make sure that we're providing rehab costs associated with putting back a structure that is a minimum type of replacement, just to within that spirit of the program, within that requirement that we have. A lot of times, though, districts are opting to, and this makes total sense to us, but they'll put in a new or repaired structure that includes many more features and perhaps maybe a more robust construction method. While it's challenging from the lens of providing funding for minimum work, we understand that there's required structural upgrades. There's a change in materials perhaps to prevent future issues from occurring, the same issue that caused it the first time. We want to be mindful of that, but we also want to be mindful of our minimum work restrictions. And so in general, we're going to be following the suggestions that are in those industry specialist reports, but we wanted to get your input on other considerations we can make to make sure that these are funded fairly and adequately. Again, with that being mindful of maintaining our need to provide minimum funding, but also understanding that in many cases they need to have some upgrades. And so we've taken a stab in our regulations at that, but we're really interested in any suggestions that you might have for that. Supplemental grants are next. And these are really minor updates. The first one for the seismic mitigation program section that is dealing with where some buildings on the site are being replaced, but not all buildings. The urban security impacted site grant was not included. That was just an oversight. And so we added that into that. We've been approving that grant where it's eligible for sites that it's eligible on, but we wanted to officially put it back into the regulations. And then currently seismic mitigation rehab applications They contain a supplemental grant for two-stop elevators. Which is an eligible cost, but it's unnecessary to have in that section because it can simply be entered into the 5801. And so, that's the reason why you'll see there's not really a whole lot of extras included in that area for rehab. But we wanted to just clarify that the reason we're removing it from the regulations is that it's already covered by just putting those costs into the 5801. Okay, so that is the first section I wanted to get through. I'm going to pause here for questions. And then once we're done with some of the questions we've had thus far, if we have any, we're going to go into all the details of the 5801. So I will open it up for questions.
And at this time, we have not received any questions in our Q&A option under the more. So just want to let you, nothing has been received yet.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Mastretti, and she is going to discuss.
Oh, hang on a second. We have one coming.
Oh, sure. We have a question coming in. Thank you.
I hope it's okay if I unmute.
Yeah, I can hear you, Amy. I know
Brian, just curious about how this applies to the existing applications that were submitted, even before the first 2020 regulations were changed. I mean, it seems clear about a change of approach for inclusion of more specific information in the industry report, but and 3, 4, 5 years later, 6 years later, in some cases, is there a thought about how to approach the applications that have been, hanging out and trying to get processed, and perhaps a lack of detail that OPSC might like to see, and perhaps a lack of opportunity to provide such detail?
Yeah, so I know the projects you're talking about, and for the most part, this is an issue specific to your district, Amy, and not to minimize that or anything, just that for the most part, these are changes that we think we're just clarifying. We're clarifying the way that the program should work. In cases where it was submitted prior to the original, you're talking about prior to 2020. We've been evaluating those with the district kind of on a case-by-case basis. But the stuff I'm talking about today is really more to deal with future applications and applications that we've been processing under these rules. We think the rules were in place for the most part here. We're just clarifying them, and so we intend to process applications the way that they should be according to the rules. Your case is very unique. We'll continue to work closely with you on those, but that's really kind of not what we're doing here today. We're really just kind of talking about clarification of existing rules today.
Understood. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure. Thanks for the question. All right, anybody else? You're not going to get off easy today, guys. We need your feedback. So hopefully you're just formulating some questions or some ideas. We would really like some input today, though. I hope we've done a good job, and maybe that's the case. But the more input we can get, the better. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. And I'm going to scroll down to the form. So I'm going to stop talking now. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brian. All right. So you guys have in that cover item the detail that we've outlined for some of the updates that we're doing to our cost estimate template. So what we're going to do is I asked Brian if we could just zoom in on attachment B. So if you guys are following along on the PDF or you have a printout, we're going to jump down to attachment B. So what you'll notice is the beginning of attachment B is updated instructions for this cost estimate template. So just to be clear, when I say the cost estimate template, I'm also referring to the form 5801. So I want to pause really quick and give just a little bit of backstory or a little bit of history about this form. So this form, the SAB 5801, is a little bit different than all the other forms that OPSC has, like the 5004 or the 5001, 2, 3. This form is a little more dynamic because what it really is a template. And the regulations have been written such that it says what the template must contain, but the format itself is not actually something that's set in stone. And so in working over the last 4 years with this great template that was created in the first place, hoping that it would make this application process easier for districts. Again, in working with districts over the last 4 years, we found that there's actually a number of things that we can clarify or improve or just kind of change the format of to make this form a little bit easier to use, but also super transparent on how the calculations are being done and why and what the authority is for that. So with that said, let's kind of jump to it. The instructions, again, are right there, but Brian, would you mind just scrolling down to the beginning of our form? All right. So what we'll do first is, I know this form is really big, so it might not be easy to see the entirety of it on your screen. So I'm going to ask Brian as we walk through if he'll scroll in, because he's the one leading the screen right now, if he'll scroll in on these different sections that I'm wanting to highlight. So the first thing that we should see looking at this form, just kind of big picture, is the format slightly different. Again, that's just to accommodate some of these extra things that I'm about to go into. The first thing that's new is that if you're looking in the title section of part 1, OPSC allowance is now number 7. That's to be able to more easily reference this when you're reading the instructions. It previously was just unnumbered. The next update is that columns 8 and 9 used to be combined into one column that was just for comments. And now we found that in processing these applications with districts over the last couple of years, it's actually easier if we have 2 columns. One column will be the district's comments that you'll enter additional information in when you're initially completing this estimate. And then the OPSC review comments will be added while we're reviewing the application to give more information on, if our plan verification team has approved the request, but at a different dollar amount, maybe because CR West outlines a different dollar amount, or perhaps we measured the plans and found a slightly different amount than what was being requested. These columns will just help clarify who those comments are coming from, whether it's the architect or the district, or some other district representative, or if it's OPSC and the plan verification team. Okay, so the next thing that I want to highlight that is new is in the bottom left corner. What you'll see is a new line item. So this new line item is for access compliance. The reason for this is kind of like Brian was referring to before, districts have been able to have these facility hardship projects or these seismic projects be part of sometimes a larger or more comprehensive project that's happening at the site. So with that though, this program can really only pay for the minimum work that's associated with mitigating the health and safety threat. So where that has become a little bit complicated in processing applications over the last number of years is that when we have these types of hybrid projects where, maybe the district is replacing or not replacing, maybe the district is mitigating one of their buildings, but additionally replacing or doing work elsewhere, the overall plan set that's approved by DSA may have more accessibility work that's being required for code compliance than is strictly required for the rehabilitation in that facility hardship or seismic project. So in that case, it's been really difficult sometimes for the districts and for OPSC also to figure out how much of this accessibility work or this extra code work is associated just to facility hardship versus the other portion of the project. Well, in trying to make this easier, Title 24 actually allows the maximum accessibility work required by code to be capped at 20% of the project. And so what we found is we believe this could be a way by allowing this 20% in lieu of the additional line items that are related only to the code compliance requirements. This would be a way that we can, within the law, provide the maximum amount of funding that the district will be required to put toward their accessibility work without having to outline every single little thing, whether it's opening doorways or path of travel or painting or new signs for parking or any of those items. The idea is to provide this allowance instead. And actually, I want to clarify, it's not just to provide this allowance. Instead, the district does have the option to outline what their work is. So let's say, for example, you have a facility hardship project where you're rehabilitating your building and everything on the DSA approved plan set is limited to only that facility hardship project. Well, in those cases, it's much easier to identify what the work is because it's clearly outlined in the plans and it's what DSA is approving as the minimum, which they state in their approval letters as the associated work. If a district would prefer to outline the work in individual line items, you're absolutely allowed to do that. This allowance is supposed to make the completion of this estimate a little bit easier for you. So with that finalizes or concludes part 1 of this form. So with that, the last thing I'm going to kind of highlight is our line here, the OPSC allowance subtotal line. I just want to highlight that title because in our next section, we're very careful in our instructions to refer to the proper title of the different sections we're referring to ensure that the calculations are being completed as desired. So, Brian, would you mind scrolling to the next page now? Okay. So what you should see is a whole lot of information here. So part 2 is now what we're referring to as our contractor burden section. So as Brian mentioned earlier, we used to refer to this section as, but in working with Sierra West, with some of the districts, we thought, it's actually much better to clarify that what we're really meaning is contractor burden in this section. So soft costs in other areas can be considered something that should or shouldn't be included in contract amounts. And so I'm going to kind of put that aside, but for that reason, we don't want to be so casual in saying soft costs when really that's not exactly what this is. So going to this section, this contractor burden section should look a little bit different than it did before. What we're doing is if we look at the current version of the Sierra West publication, so for this, we use the Red Book. If you look at that section, we've just outlined each contractor burden allowance that book provides. We've done it in the order that the book outlines it. And we now included this by reference just right there on the left-hand side. So if anyone wants to see, where is this number coming? How is this calculation happening? What's the authority? You know, hopefully it'll be really easy with having the reference number there. Additionally, in the description, to try to just again add clarity, we're not changing anything, but adding clarity on what is a general condition? What is overhead profit and bonds? What is escalation, and what do those costs or what do those allowances go toward? So we provided a little bit more information in the description for each one of these lines. And then if you look all the way to the right, we included a calculation.
I think we lost Jen. So I'm going to go ahead and take over here. I think what she was about to say is that
I'm back.
Oh, there she is. Again with
So
calculation.
sorry.
No problem.
So sorry, don't know what happened there. But in the calculation detail, we just wanted to provide additional clarity in exactly how this calculation is being done. Additionally, I want to note that while we're looking at a PDF right now, the form itself is actually in Excel. And so if you like, at the end of this presentation, we have contact information for our communications team. You can request an Excel version of this form. And in that, we actually have all these things auto-calculating for you. We're hoping that by doing that, one, when you click in these different cells, the allowances cells, you'll be able to see exactly how that formula is taking place, exactly where the percentages are coming from, and how they're then being added together and compounding. So if that's something that you're interested in seeing, again, you'll be able to see that better in the Excel version. But here we have an explanation on how those calculations are done. And again, we're not wanting to change the regulations or anything in how this is done. We're just trying to conform to them. So again, CRWS continues to be something that's required by the regulations for us to follow. So we're hoping that updating this section of the form will make it a lot easier to look at the book side by side and understand how to come up with these numbers or where they're coming from. Okay, so with that, I do want to highlight one thing. So when you're doing the comparison of the book and what CRWS allows versus what this form is allowing, you'll see that there's actually a section for a geographic adjustment, and that's part 1.5. So that is not included in this template. And so I want to acknowledge that really quick and say that's actually on purpose. And that's because when these updates were originally done for the program, there was a discussion on specifically the geographic adjustment that's within the CRWS guide. The school facility program already has a geographic adjustment that it applies to its projects. And facility hardship and seismic are a subset of that. And so with that, the board chose to actually expand the program to allow these types of applications to get the geographic adjustment under SFP. So that's under regulation section 1859.83A. And so we want to acknowledge that these applications are eligible for a geographic adjustment. Absolutely. It's just we're going to go with the geographic adjustment that is within SFP instead of CRWS. You can see in the cover item that one of the things we highlighted is if we did go with the CRWS adjustment, a significant amount of the project funding would go, or a significant amount of the state, their project funding would be reduced. And so that was one of the things.
I think we lost her again. See if she comes back again.
Sorry, I think I bleeped out again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Um, so I'm not sure exactly where we left off, but just saying, with the geographic adjustment, that's why we don't have it outlined here in our form template. And then the next section just below that would be for design costs. Now, this section, again, we're not proposing on changing anything major, but we wanted to make sure these two areas were separated because the costs under contractor burden are supposed to be compounded, and they're supposed to be compounded in order that they're outlined there. And the design costs and fees should not be compounded within those amounts. They should be additional allowances put on top of that construction subtotal from part 2. So here, all we've done really is we've tried to clarify the names of different things. So, for example, the amount for
Yeah, I think we really lost her this time. I'm going to try to go through this like she was planning to. Essentially, what she's talking about is that these costs on the bottom, we use the amounts above, and then they're compounded into the bottom section. I don't think that we've changed really anything here, other than to clarify exactly, provide some more information on how they're calculated, and just to make it clear about exactly which one of these, exactly what they're for. So I think, I do know one clarification that we wanted to make. When we look at the percentages that we apply to these increases, there's two different lenses that we look through. When we're establishing the percentage multiplier, we look at the total project. And so that's the amount that you will have on record with DSA for the total project cost. That will determine the percentage that we use. And then we apply that percentage to the allowed amounts that were within this worksheet, just specifically for the project that we're funding, so that we're scaling the multiplier or the increaser to the entire project, as that's how it's going to be performed. But then we just apply it to the amount that we're actually funding, so that we're just funding the minimum work and we're funding the contractor burden or design costs and fees associated with the actual project. And I think that about covers where she was going. Now, if she pops back on here and has some additional information, I'll give her that opportunity. But one of the other things we wanted to remind you of, if you haven't noticed it already, is that when we send out our worksheets, we have an additional tab in them that will actually show the calculations. And so you'll be able to not only see how they're scheduled on the form here, but then you'll see the actual calculations that took place to where we derived our numbers from. It's another thing that we're just trying to do to make sure we're totally transparent, that it's very clear exactly where our findings came from and where we landed at. And so, pardon me, that's the intention behind that approach. Now I think we're done with this section, and let me check one more time if Jen's back. Jen, are you there?
I didn't want to interrupt you. You're doing great.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that is it. Just would encourage people to go ahead and request that Excel version if they're interested, so they can see all the fun tricks that that version has to show.
Thank you. Yeah, and that folds nicely into what I wanted to do next. So like Jen mentioned, if you want an Excel version of that form, we have it available. And also, as you can see here on your screen, we'll be accepting written feedback after this meeting through about June 14th. And the only reason we're hoping to have it by the 14th is so that we can, kind of maximize our time for getting any information that you want to share with us, and then also taking the time to incorporate it into our next item. And we have another meeting planned. I don't know the exact date yet, but it'll be roughly a month from now, maybe 5 weeks, maybe a little bit less, but right about a month from now. We want to keep it going and keep it fresh. And like I said, the intention we had in this first meeting was to introduce you to the goals that we have and the concepts that we're trying to bring forth. But the next meeting will get much more into the nitty gritty of the regulations, the actual language that we're incorporating, and just making sure that we're achieving what our goals are, and that we're incorporating any feedback that you might have. We've already had a chance to ask questions, and so I wanted to allow for more time for that before we conclude. But that is our presentation for today. Again, please share any feedback you have on any of these items. Also, if there's other things within these programs that you feel we could take a look at, or that were bouncing around up in your mind, please share those as well, and we'll make sure that we consider those and take a look at those as well. So I don't know, Tracy, do we have any other questions, or is there anyone that wants to maybe raise their hand?
At this time, there are no questions posted in the Q&A.
Okay. I'm going to wait just a few minutes to see if anything pops up. Feel free to use that Q&A section. If you wanted to raise your hand, we could also unmute you, and you could ask the question directly if you'd like. I'm seeing a hand from Amy. Go ahead, Amy.
Thanks. I had one more question regarding nuance of the asbestos.
Yes.
If it's like on the 5801, or you're going to have a rehab of the building, and that minimum required work anticipates having to do abatement of the asbestos, that would not be part of SMP. It would need to go mod, or did I think I'm misunderstanding maybe the nuance of it. If you could clarify a little.
So you're talking about if it's part of a larger project where there's several or maybe more than one health and safety issue, like I don't know, for example, maybe a structural issue, and you uncover some asbestos. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, like if it's a structural issue and you anticipate having to open the wall, and within the wall you've done some initial tests, and those initial tests indicate asbestos. So
I
it's
think,
not immediately friable.
right.
But
No, I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's something that we would want to take maybe a closer look at on a case by case. I'll tell you what, though, we didn't address that particular question in this cover. That's definitely something that I'll make sure we get some more information on for next time. I don't know if I have a clear answer for you right now on that, but we'll definitely address that at our next meeting.
okay, because I think the other instance, like if you were doing replacement work, I think the regs envisioned that that type of work would be included as part of like the square footage calculations, or is there another like grant adjustment that would be specific for the asbestos removal as part of replacement?
Well, if you're doing replacement, the funding you get is just based off of whatever square footage you apply for. And then there would be demo work associated with the building you're removing. And so we can clarify that as well. We'll take a look at that in depth, and we'll be prepared for a lot more discussion on that next time.
Sure, and I'm curious if perhaps you would recommend, like, for some of these things that, like, if you're referencing that it's like a case by case basis and considering, the backlog of modernization money, would you perhaps suggest that like an SMP application be submitted concurrently with a mod application, in the hopes that, I guess, that if it was deemed to not be part of SMP minimum work or eligible work, that at least it would be kind of captured somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would advise that or not. It's something you could definitely do. Our goal would be to make it very clear about what you can and can't do, so you wouldn't have to do that. But essentially, any work that we just want to make sure we're not funding it twice. And so if it qualifies for facility hardship, then you could go that route, and then you could just remove that scope from your mod app. And kind of the reverse goes there too. If we find it to be eligible for facility hardship and you already have it in your mod scope, you could remove it from that.
And is mod scope allowed to be just the asbestos removal?
Yeah. Yeah, you could do that. If that's all it was, then yeah, you could apply for that. You want to look at 60% commensurate and minimum grant request, things like that, but that's an eligible expenditure under that program.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question in the chat.
Sure.
The question is there an example of additional work required by an agency other than DSA?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind, and I can't remember exactly where it was located. I want to say it was down south, somewhere down in Southern California. There was a requirement to dispose of materials in a certain location, and it was beyond what we would normally fund. And so I believe it was a local agency that was requiring this, and I'm sorry I don't have all the details on it, but I think I'm remembering it pretty accurately. And that's one example of something that we might see where there's some sort of you can't go to the nearest space to release that material. You need to go to this specific place that's much further away. And I think that we paid for fees associated with that. So it's really anything that a governmental agency is requiring as part of that project that you have no choice in the matter, and that it's tied to the mitigation of the health and safety issue that you're being funded for. So I hope that helps.
Just to add another example, CGS, the California Geological Survey, also often requires some work to be done for our seismic projects if the issue is related to faulting liquefaction or landslide potential. And so that's another agency that will look to their authority and their insight in the mitigation measures.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? Like I said, we'll have, you're able to, if you want to give me a call or anybody else a call, or send your feedback via email. You can send it to our OPSC communications team. The address is there on screen and also in the item. We're happy to receive that, and we'll make sure to incorporate that into our next item. Okay, seeing no more questions, last chance. And if not, I just wanted to thank everybody who attended today. Like I said, our next meeting will be in about a month, and we'll have more information on that shortly. Really appreciate everybody coming, and for any feedback that you provided today or that you're going to be providing in the future, we really appreciate it, and look forward to partnering with you on a better set of regulations for these programs. Okay, with that, I'm going to adjourn. Thanks again. We'll see you all very soon. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you.